Hey everyone, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the Daydream Rose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me again. I'm really excited to share this episode at this particular time because I guess we're all approaching our first anniversary of going into lockdown and understanding that we were heading into a pandemic, and obviously that's happened in different ways and different stages for all of us, but very roughly I guess. We're all approaching this time where we're taking stock and thinking about, what's been going on for us, I guess. And so, in this interview, I spoke to Avni Trivedi, who's such a beautiful body worker and educator, and who was really generous in sharing about how lockdown is affecting our bodies, how we can make space for grief, how we can hold all these different emotions and uncertainty in ourselves while also, living cyclically and staying true to our own experiences. So, this feels like a really good episode to share right now. I want to say sorry for the sound quality. You'll hear Avni really loud and clear and beautifully, and my sound is a little bit off and muted strangely. I really don't know why that is, and it's almost a bit like there was a spell on Avni and me recording because this is already the second interview we did. The first one was sadly completely unusable sound quality wise, and the second time round Avni came through really beautifully, and then I don't know what happened on my end, but the good news is that I hired the wonderful Emily Crosby to help me with tech around podcasting, so that shouldn't happen again. And I also feel that it's really mainly about Avni and her story and what she's sharing. So you'll hear my questions, not so clearly, but I think the main thing, which is Avni's voice, is really well hearable. So that's good. So a few updates before I share the episode from me. I continue to heal slowly but surely. I broke my leg on New Year's Eve and I'm still in a hard cast, and will be not walking for another few months. But I think that I'm much more settled in this experience now. I'm more grounded in my rhythms and my work. I have help with someone coming to walk the dogs, and also the snow has melted in Scotland now. So spring feels much more within reach, and that's so nurturing. I live on the first floor, and I wasn't able to kind of take my crutches down the stairs into the garden until the snow melted. So now that this is gone, my world has really expanded from my flat into the garden. And that feels so good. So I'm really excited to see what joy that will bring over the next few weeks. We have also made some changes. I say we, I mean I made the changes, but everyone is participating and I'm so grateful. In the embodied ritual community. So as you've known, I have offered a Patreon for many years. I've offered different low-cost programs last year. Through winter in the last 5 months, we had weekly creative space sessions on Saturdays, which I really love and have been so nourishing. And I've now more recently also set up Mighty Networks for us. So this is our own space. It works like Facebook, but it's definitely not Facebook. And we all talk about rituals and embodiment and the resources that we enjoy and the art we make. So you're welcome to join us. And I also wanted to announce another small change that I'm making to make things even better. A few of you who are patrons, and thank you again to you, have requested themed workshops. So for March, I'm going to offer fortnightly creative space sessions and then an additional themed workshops to all patrons at any level. So in March, that means we have creative space sessions on the 6th and the 20th. And then on Sunday, the 14th at 6 p.m. UK time, we have a workshop on self-massage that I'm extremely excited about. I'm going to share about making herbal infused oils. I'm going to share about you working with tools, like a head massager or, whatever you have around really. And then I'm going to share rituals and specific massage techniques that I think that really work well when we're on our own. I think this is such important work to stay present with ourselves and our experiences and connect with our bodies in ways that are safe and really don't have to be sexual at all. but that just feel good, right? Like I miss touch so much, and I'm really knowing that I'm not alone in that experience. So let's see what we can do together. I'm excited for that, and you're welcome to join us. And now I'm going to let you listen to today's episode. Thank you again. Hey everyone, I'm so excited and grateful to speak to Avni Trivedi again. I have to say that sadly, or luckily, I'm not sure, this is the second attempt to record an interview. The first time there was so much beauty shared already and it hasn't quite worked out technically. I wanted to come back to speaking to Avni again because I really love her work and her message so much, and wanted to be sure that you have a way of listening to the interview that feels really good and sounds okay. So yeah, Avni does really beautiful work around embodiment and loss and grief and medicine, and she's also a doula. So I'm really excited to speak to her again and hear how this year has been for her, what she's seeing in her patients, what she's dreaming and writing about, and what she has to share around our bodies and how we can integrate all of what's happening. Avni, thank you so much for making time again.
Thank you for having me back. I'm glad to be here.
I would love to start with just kind of a general overview of what you do. I've kind of hinted on a few things, but if you're meeting someone in an elevator and they're asking you what you do, what do you usually say to them?
I always feel that I haven't quite ever worked out what my elevator pitch is. Like I'm not slick enough, but I support people with body work. So I'm an osteopath and I work with my hands and really enjoy helping people to be more connected to their body. So that might be helping them to deal with an injury that's causing them discomfort, or supporting a woman through pregnancy, or it's just helping someone to actually feel more settled in their body. And there's the hands-on bit of what I do, and then there's other things that have been developing, like movement practices, and I have a podcast called Speak from the Body. So there's been different ways of kind of expressing what I do in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think these kinds of support are so valuable. I mean, you know this, I hope everyone who listens knows this, but just as I was listening again to you talking about how you use your hand, I was feeling this rush of gratitude in my body to know that you do this work and other people do this work, because it's not always a part of the mainstream, and it's so important and so beautiful. And I think I've always known this, but this year has really kind of like brought this home even more. So speaking about this year, we're recording this on the 5th of October 2020, and I would love to hear what lockdown has been like for you. I know you live in London, which is probably its own experience, and yeah, like what has it been like for you? You have a beautiful home, I can see. So yeah, what is it like as a body worker this year?
Lockdown initially was so much shock to process, because I'd gone from thinking that people were overreacting completely and really being quite irritated at how much people were reacting to it. And, you know, just there was a time when there were just so many conversations about COVID that just wouldn't stop. And then it got kind of, I felt it looming closer and closer, like lockdown is going to happen. And then I stopped seeing clients a few days before it was properly announced. So initially there was shock, and I just needed sleep and to just feel what it's like to not have to go somewhere. And, you know, and then that started to shift, and I wasn't too regimented with things, but I had certain things, like I was really taking care to cook nice meals and got into growing stuff like so many people did. And it's been the most unusual time for having time with my husband at home, which is just not our normal reality. So even though, you know, there's been a lot of sadness and a lot of suffering and worry for not being able to see our parents, who are all quite elderly, in terms of our little unit, it's actually been really solid. And I think we've needed that from just some challenging few years.
Yes, that resonates, and I hear that a lot, that actually there's been beautiful sides to as well, and it's complicated to hold both, right? And yeah, I also remember really needing a lot of sleep in that first wave of shock, and just noticing how everyone is on their own timeline of realizing what's happening and like coming to awareness and then integrating that. It's wild, yeah. Um, you already spoke a little bit about loss and uh, trauma and things that happen around this. So I wonder, maybe this is a big question, I don't know, but what are you grieving at the moment?
Oh, in some ways, I think the space that's opened up of not being able to rush around has meant that I've been able to grieve some big bereavements and some big losses in the last few years that I felt like I'd processed, but I'd also had a tendency to keep going. And also because I'm the kind of person that likes to make meaning from situations, I was, getting to the lesson of this experience rather than always able to just feel the fullness of it. I've grieved, or I've been grieving, a shift that's been coming anyway, but it's been accelerated, that I didn't just want to be a hands-on practitioner. Like, I knew that that wasn't satisfying me enough, and I knew that I wanted to have a bigger purpose and a bigger expression. But I've also worked really hard. Like, to train as an osteopath takes 5 years, and I've done another, I would say, at least 10 years of postgraduate training in some form or other. So to get to a certain point and then just go, yeah, this doesn't look like what I really want, also feels quite frustrating in many ways. And although, like, I'm simply happy and I'm grateful for certain, the ease of having like hot water in the taps and things like that, I do grieve, just the things that become everyday things that, aren't always necessary, but they're losses. And it's coming up to Diwali in about 2 weeks' time. And, I often have this kind of slightly petulant resistance to having big family gatherings. But actually, the older my parents get, the more it's that reality of one day there won't be these kind of big family gatherings. And so, I grieve that, of my nieces and nephews are getting older. One of my nephews has started a master's, and I'm like, what? He just started university. How did that happen? So yeah, change.
Yes, change and the time passing. I feel like this year time has contracted and also expanded in such mysterious ways and really shifted all the time and was so hard to keep track of. I know that you're supporting people with loss in different ways, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that. I actually hope to work with you on loss one day. It hasn't yet been the right timing, but I'm always seeing what you're up to, and I've trained as a death doula myself last year, so I'm really interested and curious what that work will look like for me, and I'm not sure yet, but I would love to hear, what you find has helped this year and what's showing up for people.
Well, the loss workshop that's called Moving Through Loss, that came about partly because I just didn't feel like there were enough services to do with loss and grief, or there would be the idea that the expert is telling the person what they should be thinking and feeling and when they should feel better. And being a body worker, I just give the onus back to the body. Like, that's where things are felt. So I created a workshop and used different tools to help people to connect with their body. And it's done in a really gentle way. So it's generally on a Sunday. So it's a kind of slower pace, and really creating this feeling of safety so someone can actually go inwards. And it's done in silence. So there's not that kind of distraction of the outer world. And also it's now online. So what was done in a room is now online, which has actually been quite nice to see what that brings up. And I've had people come in very, very different states of, like, some have gone through very fresh losses and others it's really historic. And the kind of similar feedback is how gentle it is and how easy a space it is to go into, which I feel really grateful for, that paradox that the heavier things in life don't always have to be heavy for us to address them. And I think there's something about, giving the kind of the onus on the psychologists or the therapists in this realm, which I don't agree with, because there's a separation about the mind and body that happens, which is not how we work. So it's work that's really important to me. And because it's done in such a private way, the person isn't having to justify their loss. It can be it's a real acceptance of whatever is a loss to you is a loss to you. And then you be with that loss, which sometimes when we get into the story of grief and loss, there can be this thing of what's the most tragic or what's the most traumatic, and almost like one-upmanship on the story. And I just don't think that that's necessary, that, loss is loss and pain is pain.
Yes, there was so much there. I was just nodding along, which people couldn't see. But yeah, I loved everything that you said, to really kind of honor the body in the process and not be descriptive or prescriptive about what a timeline is or what a good or worthy grief is. I think this year has really opened this conversation up so beautifully, and so many people have begun with smaller losses, just like grieving that so much of our freedom is gone, that we don't have the same social connections anymore, that we have lost so much stability, or at least perceived stability, that we felt that life was so much more predictable before all of this happened. And I think for many of us, that's also a kind of doorway to look at again those bigger losses that are more historic. And I love what you're describing so much. And I love the idea of grief literacy almost being like a muscle, that we come together and we witness each other. And the more we begin to name and share and feel in our bodies what it's like to feel loss and grief, I feel like there's a real sense of resilience as well, because every time I am in this kind of experience that you describe, I become more confident in thinking that I can do it again. And when something bad happens again, I might be able to cope with that as well.
Am I back?
Yes, okay. Yeah. I was just waffling and basically reflecting on what you were already sharing, so you haven't missed much. But I'm glad you're back. I would love to hear how you first got into this work, because like you said, you've done extensive training over a long period of time. And yeah, how did you start out? Was that always something you wanted to do, or how has that come to be?
I've always, ever since I can remember, been interested in the bigger questions, the deeper questions. And we grew up with having 3 of my grandparents at home with us at different stages. So, the loss of grandparents of dying was some of my early kind of difficulties or difficult experiences. And then when I became a doula, I think it's such a parallel of how we come into the world and how we leave the world. So they felt like natural and aligned aspects of the same thing, really. And working with so many women through pregnancy, loss is just part of pregnancy, sadly. Some of my most, the deepest experience when I've been working with clients is clients who've lost babies along the way, and it's something that doesn't get talked about enough, and it affects the therapist or practitioner that's working. And also it's frustrating to see how few resources are available, and how the shame of society just means that things don't get talked about, and there's just so much there. So I just over time felt like I had more and more tools that I could work with. And for my own experiences as well, when I've had losses in the past, whether it's been bereavements or breakups or other forms of losses, there've just been times where I've been so lost and not able to express it. Like my grandma died when I was 14, and we shared a room, and I had really bad insomnia afterwards. And I used to go in the middle of the night to my mum and dad's bed and have to just sleep there. And no one spoke to me about it. It was just not talked about. And to think, gosh, in my 40s, I'm only now starting to find a voice for that was traumatic to share a room with someone that I'd seen her dead body in her bed, and then no wonder I couldn't sleep afterwards for a while, so I feel very firmly that when you learn something, there's an onus to share it or teach it. And so as I've become more equipped for myself, it feels important to share those tools.
Yes. I almost want to go back to 14-year-old Avni and give you a hug and be like, there will be time and space in your future life to talk about all of this, and it's valid to not be able to sleep. Yeah, that's really big. Thank you for sharing. We've already touched on kind of the value of bringing the body in and really listening and developing that practice. And I wonder, at this time, what do you wish more people knew about their bodies? Like, what feels like a good starting point to start looking and listening?
Oh, there's so many things. Our bodies are with us, and they're not to be fought. They're not to be controlled or overridden. They're to be listened to. And rest is crucial. And if we don't create the space for ourselves now, unfortunately, our bodies will have to create it later. So better to do it as a conscious choice than have to deal with other things. And fundamentally, we're responsible for our body, so we don't have to agree to anything being done to us. We can be, we can choose whose hands we put ourselves into and choose the information we want to respond to. But so much, that's just like a lifetime of work. I feel like say in clinic, I'm often having conversations with clients and just saying, what do you mean you don't like your therapist? Why would you go to a therapist you don't like? Like, why would you sit in the space with someone that you don't like them? No one was ever told that you don't have to do that. So there's so many things of giving autonomy, or the idea of what's a yes and what's a no, and that gets overridden. Like someone in labour, and she's asked whether she'll have a vaginal examination, and saying yes when she doesn't actually mean yes. There's so many situations like that of your body's precious, but you have a voice.
Yes, and it's really hard. I love that you shared that. I think this overriding can become so ingrained and so present that it's really hard work to come back to the yeses and the nos and to intuitively feel them in one's body. I definitely remember at my 20s having massages where I was really tensing up and not enjoying the touch at all, and yet I was completely mute and didn't say, oh, can I have more or less pressure, or this doesn't feel quite right, can we move on to the next body part? And I remember that, and now I want to go back and be like, this is my experience that was meant to be supportive. Why didn't I say something? Yeah.
Situations like that are so awkward, aren't they? The same of like having a haircut that you don't like.
Oh, God.
It's just not easy to, so even though I think we should all have that autonomy, it's not always easy. And, sometimes we'll kind of just appease a situation rather than have that awkwardness on the outside. But it's the fact that our bodies feel it internally that I think is really important.
It is, yeah. You're offering so many beautiful modalities. One of them is zero balancing, and I would love to hear just a little bit more about what that is, because I hadn't heard about it before speaking to you.
It's a form of body work that I really love because it looks at the structure of the body and it looks at the energy system. So it's like osteopathy and acupuncture combined. And the man who founded it, Fritz Smith, he's in his 90s now, and he is an American doctor and an acupuncturist and osteopath, and had spiritual experiences and was in that real kind of exploration in the 1960s. And there's such a humanity about the way that the touch is used. And like, I'd studied osteopathy for 5 years and had never really looked at touch. So it's something I intuitively knew that was really important, but never got that intellectual part of exploring the curiosity about touch. So when I trained in zero balancing, it was a very different experience of having almost like an apprenticeship where you would have to do the body work on the teacher so they get to know your touch and help to improve your sense of touch. And the difference of if you do something that's from your full body rather than just applying touch just from the fingers, it just feels so different. And as well as it being a type of body work, it's also a philosophy. So there's things that you can look at, like when you're looking at structure and energy, it's like in life where you need certain boundaries, but if the boundaries are too